So Maddie and I have worked together. We've been together for 37, 38 years, and we've been working together for 35 years. But this is the first time we've ever interviewed each other. So this should be fun, and we're grateful for the chance to do this.
A little scary, but mostly fun.
And then we're going to leave some time for Steve and others to ask some questions towards the end of our block time together. So, my dear.
Hi.
What was it like to start AgeWave 35 years ago and to work with your husband, which I'm sure has got to have been wonderful every minute of every day?
Oh, it couldn't have been better, really. Yeah, well, it was, keep in mind, as you remember, we were not married that long, so it was a new personal relationship. And then we're tiptoeing into this work relationship. So it was a little scary, but it was also really exciting. New territory for me completely. I had never been part of a sort of family work experience, whereas your parents worked together, so it was something that you knew a little bit more about. Also, it was scary because I was new to the aging world. I had been living in Los Angeles and New York, been working as an actor, and suddenly I found myself married, living in the Bay Area, and then changing jobs. So I hit all the stress markers that you could hit. But I did feel like I had the opportunity to bring a new perspective to a field that was pretty established.
What were you hoping to bring about back in the mid-1980s? You're only in your mid-30s then. So what were you hoping to bring
early
about
30s, actually,
when we created AgeWave?
Yeah, it was interesting because we were looking at the age wave as a trend. In fact, we were seeing it as converging trends. We saw, well, the demography is shifting. We used to be like this youth-based population. Now we're becoming older, and we're seeing the changes in the population move towards that second half of life. And at the same time, we were seeing the beginning stages of a longevity revolution where life expectancy was on the rise. So we were seeing it as trends. Now I'm seeing it pretty personally. I mean, I am 70.
Yeah, people often will say to me, gee, when did your daughter start working at the company? And the truth of it is, first time this is being publicly mentioned, Maddie is actually 70 years old. She turned 70 in February. I turned 70 in March. So she's older than me, although everybody thinks you're my daughter.
I don't think most people really think that. They just say that.
You like it when they say that.
I do, kind of.
All right, so now that you've turned 70 and you've been working in this field of aging for 35 years, how does it feel like to be part of this age wave yourself?
Okay, well, let me put it into a context. When I first entered the field myself, people were thinking that 50 was over the hill, and I thought that was insane. I thought that was really crazy, and I think that we did really change the vision of what is aging into a more positive one. So I feel really proud about that. And I think that there is a more positive image of aging today than there was back then. So that's all good news. I feel a lot more wise and experienced and a little bit more self-contained, that I can handle myself. But on the other hand, I don't want to be judged by my age. People have a negative stereotype. There's ageism in our society, and I see it all around me. I mean, it's pervasive. It's even with people who are older. So I don't want chronology to define who I am. I want me, my personality, my health, my well-being, my intelligence. I want my relationships. I want that to define who I am.
How do you feel about being referred to as a senior?
Are you kidding? Senior in high school and college? No.
Word doesn't work for you.
No, it doesn't really work for me. Again, it's pigeonholing people, saying that, okay, this is who you are, rather than letting people define themselves.
Thanks. Do you have any fears about aging?
Yes, I definitely have fears.
What are your fears about aging? And then I'll share mine in a little while.
Okay.
By the way, the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask Maddy some questions, and then we're going to reverse roles, and she's going to ask me some similar and some different ones as well.
Yeah,
and
and
by the
then
way,
Steve is going to ask questions at the end.
and we are going to both talk about what we think are some possibilities for the industry, which I actually think is going to surge after all this, but we'll come back to that. So, fears. What are you frightened about?
Well, my biggest fear, I have a lot of fears, but my biggest fear is cognitive decline, dementia, losing the functioning of my brain. I mean, my grandmother had dementia. We both saw your mom struggle with Alzheimer's and my mom struggle with Alzheimer's. And it was the hardest thing to watch them decline like that and have no control, because there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease or for dementia. There are some things that have come out that we think can help either delay or prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. And I am a big proponent of taking advantage of those things. I'm also, as you know, on the board for the Bright Focus Foundation, and they support scientific research to find a cure. And also I'm part of Women Against Alzheimer's. I'm a co-founder of that organization. Again, an organization committed to trying to solve this horrible health crisis, not COVID-19, Alzheimer's disease.
You mentioned just now that while we're waiting for a breakthrough for Alzheimer's, there are some things that could be done to kind of forestall it, or to hold it at bay, or to maybe even prevent it. What's your regimen? And how often do you think about it?
I think about it every day. I wouldn't say every minute of every day, but it's an obsession of mine. I do not want to end up like my mom or your mom. It was just horrible to watch. So what do? Yeah, I eat an anti-inflammatory diet, which is, some people would say, the only exception to that is I drink wine. But other than that, no gluten, no dairy, very little sugar. So that's great. I exercise, as you know.
What about meat, fish, plant?
Oh, I try to be plant-based, but I do eat fish and occasional chicken.
Last time you had meat?
45 years ago, a long time ago. Yeah, I don't eat red meat. Oh, there's an occasional, once in a while.
Every now and then you'll grab a slice of bacon, I know, if we're traveling.
Bacon, or, when the kids were little, I didn't want to stop them from eating meat, so I'd have a little bite of their steak. But, it's not been part, and it never did any harm.
So your Prevent Alzheimer's regimen, and you've been in the field now for years and on boards and been in labs all over the world.
I have.
Anti-inflammatory diet, low fat, low cholesterol, no gluten, no sugar.
It's not low fat, but okay. Go on.
What else do you do?
Well, as I said, I exercise. I meditate.
Wait. Do you exercise for physical health or brain health?
For both, but I'm much more concerned about my brain health than, well, the physical health comes along with it, but I do it so that, first of all, it helps my moods. It keeps me a little bit more even keeled. So I love those endorphins. It gets me going and makes me feel good. I exercise because it makes me feel good and helps me take steps to prevent cognitive decline. So, but I also meditate, and I think meditation, there's scientific proof that meditation and mindfulness can grow gray matter. I take very seriously my social connections, because social connections can contribute to being healthy and cognitively sharp. In fact, there's been studies that show that loneliness is as bad for you as smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So, and I think that all those things are really important, and I've practiced them all.
So here's a question. It's all about words. Jack Rowe came out with the concept of successful aging. AgeWave actually in 1990 introduced the idea of healthy aging. We've got friends in the anti-aging field. What are the words that you like?
Well, I think all of those, except I don't like anti-aging. I feel like that's a negative spin on aging. And why go there? I like ageless aging. I like the idea of not having chronology define who I am. And I think that, there's many steps to it that are involved and that they're all important. And many of them I just already mentioned to you, like, healthy eating, fitness, mindfulness. I think finances are part of that too. And of course, our connections, which includes giving back. I think giving back is a really important part of who we are and who we become as we get older. It can really add a whole dimension that it's a win for both those giving and for those taking. I love it.
So we were watching TV, I think we were watching Homeland, and an email came in that you had just been named one of the 50 leading female futurists in the world by Forbes. And we're like, wow, where did that come from? It was just a few weeks ago. So put that hat on. How do you think boomer women are different than their moms and grandmas currently, and push it a little forward?
Well, for the most part, I don't need to take out a crystal ball to look at that. They're better educated. They've been in the workforce and in positions of power in many instances. They've been financially, I wouldn't say self-reliant, but they've been financially earning money and responsible around money. And they have a whole different set of expectations about what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a mom and a daughter, a parent. I mean, I think that we're really very different than our parents and our
We were both born in 1950, oddly and interestingly, in the same hospital in Newark, New Jersey.
We were probably right next to each other.
When you were growing up, what did your parents suggest to you might be? What was your range?
Well, they definitely wanted me to go to college, which I did. And they thought that was smart. And they wanted me to have like a backup degree. I was studying to be an actor, but they wanted me, you have to be either a teacher or a nurse, decide. And I'm like, that's pretty limited. Those are both wonderful professions that I admire, but I didn't know that I would be great at either of those things.
Say a little bit, let's go down this path a little bit. How is aging now, in your opinion, different for women than for men?
I think that the bar of judging women and judging men are very different. I mean, just stereotypically, the way men are perceived as they get older, they're getting wiser, more distinguished looking. They're just coming into their own, whereas women, after they have children and they're, having to cover up the signs of aging. I mean, it's a socially acceptable thing because women are in many ways appreciated, at least partially, by their physical appearance. Like it or not, that is the truth. And so there's a real ageist stance that's in place in our society when it comes to women aging. And add on to that the fact that women they live longer than men. They live about, on average, 5 years longer than men. They oftentimes, because they're getting so well educated, entering the workforce a little bit later, earning less, the pay gap, and we've got to fix that. That's crazy. I mean, we need to get rid of that. And then they take off time to care for their parents, to care for their children, to oftentimes care for their husbands. And although they may love doing those things and feel honored for the opportunity to do it, it gets in the way of their financial well-being. If they're caring for their husband, for instance, they may have to go into their piggy bank and take out money that would have been for their retirement. So, as all of you probably see in your senior living communities, there's mostly older women. They're left alone at the end of their lives. And so senior living is a great opportunity for them, but it's also a costly one.
Can I probe a personal thing for a minute? So when we got married, do you remember how much money we had in the bank combined?
Well, we didn't have any money in the bank.
Yeah, it was zero.
No. We were in debt.
Yeah, we had, I remember the night before our wedding, we had $40,000 in credit card debt. And with no savings.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It wasn't very funny.
And we didn't have any funding for our company, and there wasn't any like that. But And then we got going. And when you were 37 and then 40, same age for me, you had Casey and Zach, who are our two fantastic, colorful kids who they better be watching.
Yeah, you
this,
better
right?
be watching.
I mean, don't sleep in. Zach's in Brooklyn and Casey's in LA. What was it to be a working mom? Because there, for a number of years, you only were, you were kind of in, you were out. You were always getting up at 6 a.m. to make breakfast for the kids.
Yeah, but after I made breakfast for the kids, I was working on a book.
Yeah.
So I was working the whole time. I just wasn't working in a traditional manner the whole time.
A lot of women from our generation, and certainly younger women, pretty common to be working in moms. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was really, really difficult. And I know a lot of women feel that way. I mean, I felt like when I was at work, I should be home. When I was home, I should be at work. So I always felt like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it was just a horrible feeling. And I felt like I just couldn't make a right step. And one of the ways that we are different than our parents, which is very difficult, I think, for women in particular, is that our parents relied on one income to support a family. We had to rely on two incomes. And that put an extra level of stress on our personal relationship, our relationship towards our kids, and our relationship towards work, or my relationship towards work. It was very hard.
You did manage to knock out 3 books during that period, and also, help make Age Wave what it's become. So you juggled all of that.
I juggled all that, and I would go to sleep at midnight and wake up at 5 in the morning. I mean, I was pretty sleep deprived during most of that time. And, I loved every single element of it, and also hated every single element of it, because I felt like I just wasn't giving enough ever.
So right in the middle of that, your dad died as a young man at 60. What was it like to deal with death of your parent? And what happened to how would you describe your mom's path from then on?
Well, my dad died, as you remember, it was 6 weeks of illness. He had mesothelioma, which is a kind of cancer of the lining of the lungs. And it was hard. It was really hard. He was so young. I didn't think of him as being young then, but he was still very active and alive. And so it was a shock, honestly, more than anything. Even thinking about it now, it's shocking to me that he passed away so young. And it put in my brother Richard and in my head, oh my God, we hit 60 and we could die. So there was that. And then, of course, my mom, she only had one relationship.
They met in high school, didn't they?
They not only met in high school, that was her first guy that she went out with and had a relationship with, and married him. And, their marriage was not always the easiest thing in the world, but he was the person that she was committed to for her life. And then he was gone. So it was incredibly difficult. And we spent a lot of time with her that year, which was actually it was a bonding, warm experience with my mom and with us. It was some funny moments. And after about a year, she started dating, which was made all of us a little crazy. We were like, huh? What is she doing? It was intense. And then shortly after she started dating, she called me up and told me how she met a guy. And I go, great, that's terrific. Love to hear it. And she goes, no, I want you to meet him. I go, well, okay, does he live near you? And she goes, well, actually, he just moved in. And I'm like, Mom, what?
It was 2 days after they had met.
2 days later. So I got to see myself turn into the parent of my mom, who seemed like a teenage daughter to me. It was insane. Luckily, it all worked out great. She married ultimately they did get married. They didn't just live together. And she married Ray, and he became a great, grandparent to our kids and a great in-law,
Great
and
father to
more than
me.
anything, he showered my mom with love, and she just ate it up, and she really thought of him as the love of her life. So it was
Ray is
beautiful.
97, and I believe he's on
I
this
hope you are. Hi, Ray
program.
Ray. After that plug, I hope you're on the.
All right, we've got a few more questions to go, and then you're going to flip it over to
Okay,
me.
good.
There's a lot of talk about how older adults should be teaching young people stuff, and I'm going to comment on that when you interview me. But what do you think younger people ought to be teaching their parents and grandparents now?
Well, contextually, I think that creating relationships between the generations is one of the most important things that we can do. That intergenerational understanding and bonding is essential for the generations to have give and take between them. And I think that's essential. But, come on, it's pretty obvious that when it comes to technology, a lot of older adults need some help. They need some instruction, and whether it be formal or informal, it's actually better if it's informal with your child or your niece or your nephew or somebody. If you're spending time giving to children, maybe teaching them to read, they can teach you to use the internet and to use social media. And if it's your grandchildren, well, that's like really special. People love talking about that. And how they can learn from their grandchildren. And to me, that's fantastic.
Let me ask you to put your boomer futurist hat on for a second.
Okay.
Boomers look out at retirement. What do you think they're hoping for?
Well, as you know, we've done lots and lots of studies in this area. So we've dug deep into the subject. We know that boomers tell us that they look forward to retirement. But they plan on working in retirement. So work, retirement, they're not opposites anymore. They're connected. And that's an important good thing because many boomers haven't saved enough for retirement. But they also feel excited about having new adventures and having the opportunity to maybe have a second act, reinvent themselves, have the opportunity to give back to things that really matter to them and to focus on things that really matter to them, people that really matter to them. On the other hand, they do have fears, and their biggest fear is that they're not going to have enough money to pay for health care, that they'll be a burden to their families, and that they're going to run out of money altogether. So those are some real fears.
Last question for now. Well, I might throw one little quick one in and then we'll switch. If you were to give some advice to the senior living industry, what would it be? What do you think the future is going to be for that industry?
First of all, as you alluded to in your early comments, I think that you're well positioned, especially during the COVID-19 trauma, and it is a trauma, to be leaders and to take a stand on both what the future could look like and what the future could look like for older adults. So I think that that's really important. And let me say a little bit more about that. The theme of ageless aging, I think, really comes in to play, especially right now. Let me just put it first into the context of COVID-19. We hear everybody talking about testing and retesting and tracing, all of which are really important. However, equally important is building our immune system up. And nobody is talking about that. And that is insane to me. I mean, we ought to be eating healthy and exercising, but also we ought to be supplementing with things that we know help build your immune system. Like, for instance, vitamin C, simple thing, very easy. Zinc, we know that that really helps. Elderberry, everybody, in the health promotion field talks about it, but it's not mainstream. And that's a place that senior living communities could bring in lectures, and whether they be on Zoom or in live cast, they could help in that way. They could also create a hub of social interaction and in some new and different ways. Now, yes, I know that the senior living communities really do talk about and have the opportunities for people to commingle and have relationships and such. But, why not giving opportunities? For instance, I remember when your mom was alive, she was this amazing tap dancer, and she taught tap dancing in her retirement community. She also went out to the schools and taught dancing, and she taught a whole group of women to go out into the schools and teach tap dancing to underprivileged kids. And she got so much value out of that. Plus, she created relationships with these other women in her community. Mm-hmm. So I think opening up the door to that in a more proactive way would be a good, being more proactive about the items that I talked about earlier, that, mindfulness and such, these things ought to be part of everyone's everyday life. And senior living communities can take the lead in showing the way. You can be leaders in showing how it's done and how it's done right.
Thanks.
You are welcome.
Thanks for everything. You want to hit me up here? You want to ask me some questions?
Yeah, let me ask you. So let's turn the tables here. And this is both weird and interesting and fun.
I think it's great.
So you asked me, I'll ask you. Why and how did we decide to start AgeWave 35 years ago? How was it different from what I said, and how is it the same?
I had, I initially went to school to be a physicist, as you know, and then dropped out and moved from Newark to Big Sur to become a hippie and yoga teacher. And so by the way, I'm sort of returning to my roots a little now. It's kind of nice not to be able to get a haircut. I'm sort of, maybe I'll put my earring back in. I don't know. But I came to Berkeley from Big Sur to start the first preventative health research project with the elderly. I was also finishing my doctorate and writing my first book, Body Mind, when I was in my early 20s. And we decided to work with older people and try out things like Tai Chi and meditation and yoga and journal writing. And the project became the SAGE project. It became a model for hundreds of others all around the world. And then I just kept setting up other programs. And so I spent my first 10 years in the not-for-profit sector and became really captivated by older men and women, became really fascinated by the aging process. Aging is not just the elderly, it's aging.
Yeah.
And I was also struck by the fact that the not-for-profit sector, everybody I knew was always running out of money. They'd have these demonstration projects, and then as soon as they showed something work, they'd lose their funding. And I thought, wow, I don't want to be in a situation where you're always scrounging, and groveling and begging. So I said, I'm going to do something and just be able to pay for myself, which I had never done. I had no skills at making money or business or anything.
I know.
I had to learn those a little along the way. And so we created AgeWave, and one of the main reasons was because I think I wasn't easily paper trained. I couldn't imagine working at some university or in some clinic and having people tell me what I could or could not do. And I thought that there was a big new story to be told. My mentors were Bob Butler and Maggie Kuhn, and they really pushed me. They really said, you're a young guy, you're in your 20s. You can see the future. You're going to be in that future. Your own generation is going to be this mass of people growing older. We need to re-language the field. We need to re-inspire it. We need to create a new map in a way. And so my initial thought in creating AgeWave was to create a, self-perpetuating group. Started out you and I.
At our kitchen table.
At our kitchen table. And I had one librarian researcher. I've always had research support.
I think she was also a massage therapist on
the
side.
not for us, but yeah, that was sort of a Berkeley era. And I think the idea was to try to, with respect to AARP and the gerontological organizations, to be another voice, to be a little more nimble, a little more free-spirited. And I also became captivated by the need to have this theme not just apply to the most vulnerable older people, but to all older people. The fact that my mom ultimately succumbed to 12 years of Alzheimer's, and my dad became blind his last 10 years from his diabetes. But before then, they couldn't get it out of their car very easily. And so how come we haven't designed our cars so that older people can maneuver the doors? And and buttons weren't designed for people with arthritis or women who've had mastectomies. And Maggie Kuhn and I really got off on trying to shut down the doorknob industry and create door levers. Unfortunately, pretty well everywhere in America now we have door levers. And so I began to realize there's a not-for-profit and for-profit, and why only focus on one? Why not bring this message and this energy and this fight to the larger world? So that's what I was hoping for. And I wanted Age Wave to be self-supporting. I didn't think we'd ever make much money, but I wanted to be able to pay our bills, maybe hire some people. And over the years, we've managed to hire thousands of people, and we've now got an incredible team, and we're still in the game. You know?
And it's a long time.
Yeah.
So what about for you personally? Has aging been an ascent or a descent?
Well, I'd have to say that physically it's been a bit of a descent, but I worry about that slope of that descent becoming more steep. I'm 40 pounds heavier than I was when I was younger.
You still look great.
Thanks. I've got high blood pressure. I have trouble sleeping. I've got glaucoma in one eye. And, and I know more about the prostate gland than I ever thought I should know, except every guy I know who's 70 has got the same thing they're thinking about. And so I worry that the physical, but I think, that's a natural part of life. I get it. I'd say emotionally and even spiritually, I feel like it's been an ascent. I feel a little more perspective in me than when I was younger. I've been through hard times, good times, death of loved ones, got an artificial shoulder put in, watching you go through 2 hips replaced last year. We've seen our kids struggle. Yeah, I guess, but I feel like I have perspective. It's not quite wisdom yet. I think it needs more time in the oven. But, and I feel that emotionally I'm getting better. I feel like I'm growing up. So I feel like mostly aging for me has been an ascent, and I'm thankful. And I don't know that I'd want to be. People say, wouldn't you like to be young again? And I say, I wouldn't mind having the energy from when I was younger, but I wouldn't want to be a young person right now. I think that there's a role for elders, and I'm excited about it.
Well, good. Okay, so that's great. You mentioned a little bit about what frightens you about aging, but what comes to mind for you when you think about scary stuff in aging?
Well, it's a weird thing too. I've probably, said the aging word, more times than any human being in the history of the world. I've been doing this stuff now for 45 years. I was 23 when I got in the field. I'm now 70. And people always say, oh, Dychtwald, the sunny side of aging, the positive, what could be possible, aspiration. But that doesn't mean I don't go to sleep at night and think, oh man, I've been in nursing homes and I've seen dementia and I've seen poverty and I've seen fear. And so what frightens me, like you, I don't really want to have my mind go, It's not just losing memories, it's losing the ability to remember. And, I watched my mom just disappear, and so I don't want that either. I'm hoping for the breakthrough. I too have been on that crusade, and frankly, pretty pissed off at most people in the aging field because they've not really taken that on for the last 25 years. Had they, we might have had an end to dementia right now, and it would be an entirely different world. And with respect to COVID-19, that's a horrible, terrible, terrible, scary pandemic we're in the middle of now. And it's changing our lives. But good God, we've got 5 million people in this country with Alzheimer's. It's going to 15 million and 40 million caregivers, and people are hardly paying much attention to that. So I'm frightened of that. I'm also frightened. I've been in therapy enough and I've meditated enough where I can see that there's an end to life. And that doesn't frighten me so much. Suffering, I'm not so keen on. But even more than that, suffering if you or our kids or my brother goes through hard times, or something terrible happens, that's what scares me the most.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. So just to twist into a more positive thing, but maybe not so positive. So we decided that in this celebration of our 70th birthdays, that we were going to take the whole year to celebrate. Yet, what ultimately
Didn't work
ended up
out. I had a big plan. I'm Mr. Age Wave. I'm turning 70. We were going to literally take parties all year long, gatherings with friends. We were going off to the Caribbean, you and I. I was going to be giving a keynote speech at the American Society on Aging. And my grand Kobe Bryant sort of dropped the mic. And then this terrible thing happened. It was like, wow. So last month, on my 70th birthday, it was kind of perfect. I had, first of all, it's just you and I cuddling at night.
Yeah.
And that was pretty
I
great.
made a very special dinner.
It was great. I don't remember the dinner, but I realized you put a lot of effort into it. But in the morning we had a Zoom call with you and me and Casey and Zach and my brother. And everybody says, well, how can we send you gifts? And we can't touch anything. And I said, you know what? Maybe if each of you could, I remember I asked for 3 things on this Zoom call. Tell me your favorite time with me in this life. Tell me the quality about me that you think is my best. And third, tell me, especially from our kids, what was the best day of your life, even if we're not even aware of it. I just wanted to know that. And I have to tell you that those gifts that day, and then from other friends and loved ones later in the day, I honestly felt this is the best birthday I ever had. It felt very Buddhist. Rather than seeing how many parties and how much money and how many fancy things we could do, it was just you and me.
Yeah.
And it was.
We had all those. We had a lot of Zoom calls that day.
Yeah, there were a lot of great Zoom calls, and so I was feeling pretty great, and I thought I feel loved, and it wasn't what I was expecting for my 70th, but it was in many ways the best.
So you asked me about what younger people could be teaching older people. I'm going to just flip that question. What can older people be teaching younger people about dealing with this COVID-19, but in general?
Yeah, I being in this gerontology field, the meme, as they say, that's going around is older people are vulnerable and they're struggling. We got to help them. We got to protect them. All of which is true, particularly of those who are very old, particularly of those who are vulnerable, who are ill, who are alone, no question. However, I think that young people today are getting their heads bashed. Yeah. And, if you've been dreaming of, having children and now you do, and you lost your job, that's rough. If you're a high school senior and you don't get to go to the prom and all of a sudden your parents and, the notion is your parents always know best, but all of a sudden your parents seem like frauds, and you don't know if you'll ever be in love or if you'll ever be able to be physical. And I don't know. I think that it's up to the elders, which I'm becoming, to stand up tall during this era and talk about perspective and talk about what matters and express gratitude. And also, I think that it's...
And how do they do that so that the young people hear them?
Yeah, let me say a couple of things about that. I was taken by David Brooks a year or so ago, the conservative writer for the New York Times, when he said that, you get to be 60, 70 and you got 2 resumes working. One is your career resume. You're the vice president of this, or you were a teacher there, or you made this money, or you had that house. He said, but the other is your eulogy resume. What are people going to say about who you were as a person? And if there's time, you can work towards making a better one of those. And I think that we who are older ought to be thinking about how do we be our best person? And that doesn't just mean, binging on all the TV shows you've missed. It means going out into the community, either Zoom-wise or on the phone. And when this COVID settles down safely, it means showing some love to people who are hurting. There are kids being abused in households all around this country. If that's a next door neighbor or they're upstairs from you in an apartment, or if you're living in a community, find ways to get on with the technology. Half of our 70 and older population is not on social media. Yeah. Get off it. Back in the day is over. I think that we who are...
So when you say get off it, you mean get off the...
That's not for me, that's for the young people. I think that digital divide, if you find yourself in the ditch on the other side of the digital divide, it's likely that society put you there, but you can also get yourself out. And I realize that right now with the sheltering in place, it's harder. But where I sit, that older people should be the beacons now. We should be the mentors. We should be the lighthouse. We should be the beating heart, and give perspective. Because I think to be younger, to be 30, 40, 20 right now, there's no, how do you make sense of what's going on? I can't make sense of it, but I can help calm people down, and I can talk about how change brings new possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the coronavirus has affected all of us, and you've talked a little bit how you talked a lot actually about how you see it affecting younger generations, but what about people who are like right before retirement or retired? I mean, especially right before retirement in their 40s or 50s, maybe losing their job or something. Um, what about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. I'm, as you know, we've just finished a suite of studies where we put in 10,000 hours worth of work, not you and I alone, but we had teams of economists and philosophers and gerontologists and physicians. And so we've been really drilling down into all the different stages of life. And by the way, we are about to launch our biggest study ever, which is going to be coming out in August. I'll just mention it. It's going to be on the 4 pillars of the new retirement, and we're doing that in partnership with Edward Jones. But let me go back to your question, which was.
Do you remember the question?
Yeah, I think I do.
About the people in the middle.
Yeah, if you're over 65, and with a hat tip to Bernie Sanders, who I wouldn't have voted for, but I had great respect for, you have safety nets.
Yeah.
The average couple in America receives $31,000 a year from Social Security. Average person is $18,000, solo person. And then there's a market value about $11,000 each for Medicare. So you're getting about $50,000 a year of safety net. And I'm not saying whether you deserve it or not. Yeah, I hope those.
It's certainly helping.
I hope those safety nets don't go away. Plus, if you're retired, you're not worried about having to lay off the 9 people who came to work for you or be fired. And you don't, other than grandparents raising their grandkids or whose kids have moved back in, you're not worried about how you're going to homeschool your kids while maintaining your job. So interestingly, retirees are actually in a more, they're worried about their health, but they've got more safety nets and protection. I think people 50 to 64 are getting their heads knocked right now, because it's like, wow, I thought I was going to work longer to have enough money, and maybe I won't be able to. And I don't know where I'm going to live, and I don't know how I'm going to live. I think the pre-retirees are in a rough zone right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's really kind of difficult. So do you think that there's a kind of interdependence that we can create in our society that would make it a little bit easier for them, or help them, give them a helping hand in some way?
Yeah, you use a word that I've become really intrigued by. One of my mentors I mentioned earlier was Maggie Kuhn, who is in her 70s, got the great Panthers all off and took on the world. And she was a dear friend.
Not everybody knows who Maggie Kuhn is. I do.
Founder of the Great Panther. She was great and very special person in my life. And Maggie, we filmed it actually. It was part of a learning series we created. She said, somehow in America and other parts of the world after World War II, we got a little too carried away with this idea of independence. I'm gonna have my own house. I'm gonna have my own, every kid should have their own bedroom. Every college kid should have their own major. Everybody should have their own life, their own, eventually, TV channel, their own Netflix platform, their own TikTok followers, their own influencers. And Maggie used to say that was wrong-headed, that we are really all interdependent, and we're fooling ourselves if we think otherwise. And maybe it's some kind of a capitalistic push that wants everybody to have more of everything, their own car, their own cell phone. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I know that my liver is interdependent with my kidneys. They're not the same. Before the COVID thing happened, we were watching 60 Minutes, and Australia was burning down. And Australia only represents about 1% of the pollution on the planet. But here their entire country was burning down because what was going on in China and India and the United States and other industrialized countries. And it was like, we are all interdependent. This notion that you can create a border or a wall and like that. And so I think it should be up to the elders to appreciate interdependence.
Well, appreciate is one thing, but
and
how
to
do you
manifest it, and to make friends
manifest
with
it?
younger people, to express concern, to not just want people to be empathetic towards you, but to be empathetic towards young. And I would also say that older people ought to be more, I'm on my soapbox because
I
I've
can
been
hear you
pissed off.
that.
I think older people should be more empathetic to people not yet born, to the future. We were with Harrison Ford a few months ago before this era, and he gave a talk about climate change, and he says, young people of America should plant millions and maybe billions of trees. And I had a private meeting with him afterward, and I said, first of all, it was very cool to meet Harrison Ford. And I said to him, hey man, what? You know, we got 68 million retirees in this country, and they're watching 49 hours of television a week. Why don't you have them plant trees? He looked at me and he said, I never thought of that. And I said
Which
to him,
is
yeah,
crazy considering how old he is.
yeah, you know, he's in his 70s. I said to him, but think of the meta message of planting trees that you won't ever be able to sit in the shade of. I think we need more interdependence, young and old, black and white, our country, their country. This pandemic is everybody's business. We are not separate.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And this also pertains a little bit to the whole field of aging. If you could briefly tell us what you think the strengths and weaknesses of the field of aging are.
Yeah, it's simple. I've now worked in lots of different sectors: healthcare, automotive, pharmaceutical, consumer products, food, beverage. The aging field, this is a population of people with big hearts. You know, it's rooted in the civil rights movement. They're the kindest, caringest people. And I would also say the people who are the caregivers, not just the doctors and nurses who become the saints of human history all over the world, but the people who look after my mom and your mom, my dad, and the folks that are in assisted living and nursing homes. You know, they're getting all this bad rap, but I mean, these are people getting paid very little to look after people at the end of their days. I think people in the aging field across the board, big hearts, kind, compassionate, more than any field I've ever encountered, but they're not very innovative. You can go to a gerontology meeting from 1974 and go to one in 2014, and the topics are kind of the same. Most other industries are filled with more innovators, more creators, more entrepreneurs, and more multidisciplinary talent. I think the field's got to, like, this is a wake-up call that that the aging field's got to get a new voice, a new language, new leadership, and new ideas. It's all about cross-fertility. If there's innovators meeting at the X Prize Foundation, or if there's innovators meeting at the local new business idea club in your community, bring them into your aging discussions. You know, it's like we've been too, oddly, for a field that wants to be inclusive, we've been very exclusive and want just a lot more of the same of us in the field.
So sort of a silo instead of interdependence.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
professional interdependence.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I do. So you've written a lot of books, 17, but you haven't written one in a decade. And Steve mentioned, as we began this conversation, that you have a new book coming out in July. So I'll hold it up if you like. Can you tell me anything about this book?
Yeah, you should know, first of all, that it's not actually the book which is coming out in July. We just take the cover onto another book. So that's what you do.
It looks pretty good though, right?
In the Zoom world. Yeah, Bob Morrison and I, who've written together.
I feel like
No, you can put it down. We've worked together for 15 years, and we had just, as I mentioned earlier, our whole team have come through a decade of research, United States and abroad, to find out what retirees really wanted. And what I was troubled by is I'd seen so many books about, you know, how to have your money last or what to eat to live to be 100, but none were holistic. And
when you say holistic, can you
we wanted to write what retirees want in terms of their families, in terms of their love life, in terms of housing, in terms of transportation, in terms of food, in terms of legacy. We wanted to cover the whole thing. You know, for me, for example, it's not enough to talk about that the boomers are going to have X trillion hours of free time. It's like, well, maybe they want to volunteer. So giving back should be a part of vacationing. And housing is not just a matter of, should I live at home, age in place, or move to a community, but the fact that only 2% of the housing stock in America is aging friendly. I mean, it's like, what are we thinking? We are so not ready for this age wave. So what we tried to do in this book is gather all the research and all the best examples. And we also reached out to so many of the leaders in the field, many of whom are actually in Steve's conference this week, to create what we think will be kind of the, I don't know, in some ways, a culmination book. So it comes out in mid-July. We're pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I would say that let's connect that to the senior housing industry. Give us a preview. What do you say? What do you think the senior housing field communities, what are they going to look like moving into the future? What's going to make them rise in power?
When I got into the aging field in the 1970s, older people were referred to as golden agers. That was the phrase. I mean, it wasn't, nobody thought it was silly. That was, hey, there's the golden agers over there. And then the word senior came along, and it was kind of cool and hip when it first appeared. But now we think of seniors as something our grandma was. So honestly, sorry, Steve, the whole word senior, I think, is becoming cliche. And so we'll need new language.
Maybe outdated.
Outdated, better word. I also think that that this is going to be a boom time for the industry. And part of the problem for the industry is that the average person, the average investor, the average someone thinking about where they're going to live, bundles it all together. Oh, nursing homes, that's the same as independent living. Oh, independent living, it's all the same. And didn't you hear about those, virus epidemics in nursing homes? Who'd want to live in senior living? It's like, wow, that's an industry that hasn't really handled its business about explaining what the differences are and what the options are. So here's my view. I actually think that with a few adjustments, communality is going to come back.
Communes.
Well, I'll use the word communality because communes, we think of, Jimi Hendrix posters and a lot of weed. No, I think the communality, I think a lot of people right now are thinking, wow, it's really hard to maintain a house during this virus, but it's a lot of work all the time. Maybe I'd like to make things easier. Also, a lot of people have been alone. There's a high percentage of people over 75, about 40% in America are alone. And a lot of people are thinking, being a solo, being alone was kind of okay in the pre-COVID world, but people are thinking, I don't want to be so alone. I want to have some help. I want to have some friends. I want to have people who know what I'm thinking and feeling nearby. So that's going to surge. I also think that innovative activities, we've been to some communities like Palo Alto, where there's a big relationship with the university. So the classes are going on and the people in the communities can go to the campus. I think we went to Shaw in Alicante, Spain, which is sort of a futuristic longevity community. And between the food and the medical care and the hikes and walks, I thought, wow, we were given a gift of going on the world last year, which is a floating, it's like a campus at sea, but it's for retirees mostly, but they're wealthy. But the idea of encountering the world and hearing lectures and meeting interesting people. I also really think that one of the problems with a lot of communality among older people is this age, what Maggie Kuhn called age ghettos.
Right.
When I'm 80, I don't want to be just around other 80-year-olds. I know there's something convenient to that. We can talk about our favorite Stevie Ray Vaughan song, or we can talk about whether we made it to Woodstock, but we're all better when we're interconnected. And so if the communities are just for people, let's say over 55, you got to bring kid programs in. You got to have mentors going out. You've got to have a relationship with the local theater, with the local job market, with the local volunteer offices, universities. I just think that having these little, golf course and we're all here together, I just don't think that's what's going to work. But I do believe that there's going to be a surge. I think more people are going to want to not be alone. I think more people are going to think about it earlier rather than their late 70s, maybe their late 60s, early 70s. And I think positioned intelligently and creatively, not so much on the age thing, but on the activities, the attitude, the spirit, the dynamics, the opportunity to be your best self. I think there's big opportunity. I really do.
Good. So one last question having to do with legacy. your legacy. What would you like your legacy in the field of aging? Because you've been in this, as you said, 45 years. How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I'd like to be remembered. I view myself as a little bit of a pain in the ass kind of guy, a little bit of a
Sometimes.
bump you in the nose kind of fellow. And I guess I'd like to be remembered as someone who had the nerve to speak truth to power, to try to bring the not-for-profit and for-profit worlds together. And pretty much like Paul Revere, the age wave was coming,
Right.
and sounding that alarm and that opportunity. And last, I guess I'd like to feel that I was seen as someone who tried to do good. I'm still kind of a hippie. The idea of giving more than you take and trying to create a better world for multiracial, multi-ethnic, wide variety of life and religious persuasions, multi-generation coming together.
Yeah.
That's the fabric I've been trying to weave.
I like it. Thank you.
Thank you,
This was
buddy.
fun.
Steve.
This has been an amazing conversation.
I was afraid you were going to say, the sound wasn't on.
No, it was beautiful. I will tell you that the worst part about this is that we're out of time. So I'm going to give the audience a proposition here. If you have a question you'd like to ask Ken and Maddy, we drop it in the chat box. We're not going to answer it here, but they have promised me that we could get back on a call and I could ask them these questions, and we will make it available to the audience here. So I will share to you immediately after we're done with this. I'm going to shoot you out an email with the a transcript of the. Hey Valerie, I'm going to put you on. I'm going to hide you for just a minute there. Let me just hide you away. She's our next speaker. And one of these technology things that the Zoom hasn't quite figured out yet to do. But I'm going to send you right immediately the chat conversation, seeing comments like the best session yet, love this. The community has collectively decided that your next book needs to be on marriage and relationship. And several more questions about questions on successful marriages and working together. So,
Not easy.
we're all in love with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Valerie, have a great session.